All right, let's get started. Any questions from the last class or the rest of the book? Readers? Yes.
Not quite sure. We figure out the things that you said might talk about.
So you're talking about, let's see, why it's not working. This one,
No,
this one,
no, that one.
that one. Okay, okay, we'll go over again. Yeah, I also feel like we need to show it. So we'll go over it. Good question. Anything else? Okay, so in the video, you definitely watch topics about this, right? I will start from here too. So when you talk about pro forma financial statement, what does it mean? It means we're trying to forecast. We're trying to forecast income statement and balance sheet, right? So one of the things we have to make sure when we forecast, balance sheet should balance, which means assets should be equal to liabilities and owner's equity, right? How the forecasting process should start? It starts initially with sales forecast. How much our sales will grow next year? 10%, 5%, 20%. Everything starts from there. That's the starting point. After that, what do we do? For rest of the income statement, we assume all else will be constant of sales, right? Maybe 10%, 20% of sales, right? And then we move on to balance sheet. We try to assume asset will be constant of sales, fixed percentage of sales. For liabilities and equities, we try to modify, try to change. We assume retained earnings, dividend payment, long-term debts. Those are flat values. We can implement our assumptions, which are going to learn today. So let's say this is the historical financial statement of Gourmet Coffee. When we say historical, that is in the past. When we say pro forma, that is tomorrow. Okay? So this is already achieved, already in the past, right? What are some important information from here? If you look carefully. Net income is 20% of sales, right? Total asset is 50% of sales, right? And right now in history, debt is 20% of sales and equity is 30% of sales. Make sense? So this is what you know from the history, right? Now you want to forecast. We want to go tomorrow. So this is our assumption. Sales will increase next year by 15%. So if you do 2,000 times 1.15, this should be your sales next year, right? 15% growth, right? All else are based on historical percentage of sales. From the last slide, we learned that net profit is 20% of sales. Now, if you find out 20% of this value, that should be 260, right? Make sense? But if you watch the video, I already mentioned this assumption has one or two problems because interest payments are not tied to sales, right? Depreciation are not tied to sales. But doing this way is easy, but gives you some good approximation. May not be 100% correct, but gives you some good approximation, right? Question so far, pro forma income statement. We all good, right? Okay. Now we have to balance our pro forma balance sheet. Okay. What was the asset percentage of sales in the past? How much? Okay. So how much was our sales in the pro forma? 2,300. So 50% of 2,300, right? Asset. Make sense? Now we have to balance here. We can do so many different ways to balance them. The first assumption we're trying to say, dividends are the plug variable. What does it mean? We'll balance the balance sheet. All of the rest of the net income will be used to pay dividends. So we'll first balance the balance sheet, then all of the rest of the net income will be used to pay dividend. That's why dividend is the plug variable. In that regard, if we go to the history, we know that debt is 20% of sales, equity is 30% of sales, right? New sales, 2,300. 20% of new sales. 30% of new sales. Make sense? If you do 2,300 times 20%, 2,300 times 30%. Make sense? Balance. Now what left? Our net income is 460, but we only retained $90, right? We only retained $90. What are you going to do with that? Pay dividend, right? So what we did, we issued some debt to be consistent with our debt policy, right? 20% of sales. We added some retained earnings with equity to be consistent, 30% of sales. All remaining net income. Okay. That's why we are able to balance. Isaac and anyone, questions so far? Makes sense, right? Case 2. Now what we are deciding? Debt is the plug variable, right? We'll try to play with debt. What we are doing here? Assets stays the same, 50% of sales, right? What we are doing here? We are keeping all of the net income as dividend earnings, no dividend payment, right? So we had $600 of equity from last year. This year we generated $460 of net income, which will not pay. We kept the entire balance. Our new equity, right? Now to balance, we need $90 of debt only. We used to have $400 of debt from the last year, right? So we are basically reducing the debt. How? We're using our retained earnings, retained income to pay back the debt. So the idea is, if we just fixed the asset value in terms of historical sales value, we can easily get the asset value there, right? After that, we have to choose the plug variable. Which one we will modify based on our principles, based on our assumption, so that it got balanced. Make sense? Question so far? Some problem of this approach. We know that cost can vary with sales. Depreciation, interest payment, they are not. They don't vary with sales. Also, dividend payments, they will not definitely vary with sales. Because most of the cases, corporations have dividend policy that is not dependent on sales. So dividend policy in general are not tied to sales. So these are some limitations of this approach. And firms will rarely change their dividend policy. It's a signal to the investors going forward how the company will do. So they will rarely change the dividend policy. If they increase the dividend because of only sales went up, that's a signal the firm is really doing well, very well. And going forward, the corporations may not maintain that much of sales. So dividend policy is very independent policy, and firms are very cautious, careful. That's not tied to sales. Some other things, maybe long-term debt, change of return earnings, those are also not dependent on sales. So these are some limitations, problems of saying all else are dependent on sales, which is not true. So let's move on and let's talk about pro forma in more detail. So this is a different corporations, different statements. If we look here, this is the history, okay? This is the pro forma. So from history, our cost is basically 70% of sales, right? Tax, 6.3% of sales. Profit margin, 23.7% of sales, right? And if you look here, from this net income, we are paying dividends, we are adding to return earnings. Now, from this information, tell me what is the payout ratio, what is the retention ratio? So what is the dividend payout ratio? And what is retention ratio? Calculate and tell me from this information. You need formula. Payout is from net income, how much we are paying as dividend. Retention is from net income, how much you are keeping in the fund. Okay. So if you understand the definition, you don't need the formula. Payout from our net income. how much we're paying in percentage. Retention from net income, how much we're keeping. So that's it. And these two ratio equal to 100% or 1, right? Done. You got the result? Yes.
I think I can call.
Okay. How much you got for payout and for retention?
Oh. I only did the first one, that's all.
Okay.
I got 40% for your dividend payout, 60% for your retention.
What about others? Same number? So you don't need to memorize the formula. Payout is very simple. From net income, how much we are paying, right? 1185. And then 474, right? %. Dividend is 474 from there. Net income is 1185 from there, right? Net income dividends. Right? If you know one of the two, you don't need to calculate the other one. It has to be 60%. If you know one of the two, you don't need to calculate the other one. It has to be 60%. If you do 7111185, it has to be 60% because both of them combinedly 100% or 1. Now we are assuming next year sales will grow 10%. Okay. 5,000, 10% on 5,500 easy, right? That's my sales. This should be 70% of sales because of this one. And then if we deduct this one from this, we'll get EBT. This should be 6.3% of sales because of this one. Right? You got net income. From net income, we know that 40% we pay, 60% we keep. 40% we pay next year, 60% we keep. Right? So as long as we know what is sales next year, as long as we know what is the cost to sales ratio from the past, we can generate easily to net income, right? Then we have to look out how much dividend we paid, how much we kept, same assumptions. We can find the payout and weighted earnings ratio. Makes sense? Things are easy here. So far it's easy. Things got complicated when you go to balance sheet, right? Okay. This is history. This is pro forma asset side. History, pro forma asset side. So if you look pro forma, we are just doing what was the historical asset to sales ratio. That's it. Last year, our cash was 10% of sales. 10% of 5,000 is 500. This year, our cash should be 10% of new sales. This year, right? 10% of 5,500 is 500. We're doing the same thing here. Historical asset to sales ratio. Same thing up to here, right? This should not be a challenge, right? Because we know the new sales, we know the historical sales to asset ratio, keep multiplying each year. Now, what is the challenge? On the liability side, what should be the plug variable? Accounts payable is basically a part of working capital, right? It's basically a short-term liability, right? In general, it always moves with sales. Why? If you make more sales, there is a tendency you will make more sales in credit, right? And that's why you have to give more accounts payable, right? So that's why, what is the thing? It should vary with that. If you're making more sales, you're buying more inventory, more stock, you're buying more in credit. It should move with sales. We know the new sales, we know the old accounts payable to sales ratio is multiplying, right? Okay, so this is, we fixed it. Notes payable is the kind of your borrowing, right? In general, it doesn't vary with size. It depends on your capital structure. We don't know. We just keep as is. Long-term debt. In general, it doesn't vary with sales. We don't know. We keep as is. Owner's equity, common stock, which we issued in the past, in general doesn't vary with sales, right? We don't know. Keep as is. Retained earnings. Last year we had accumulated retained earnings of 3,100, right? This year we generated this much of net income, paid this much. This is we kept. $3,100 plus 782. 3,882. That's our new retained earnings. If we sum them up, what you can see. Yes, I will. They're not equal, right? That's a good point. So far, we know our assets because percent of sales. We only know our accounts payable, percent of sales. All else we kept like last year. Only for this, last year plus new addition. Doesn't double, right? Now we have to decide how we can balance what should be our plug variable. So we have more asset than liabilities and equities, right? A lot of things we can do. If you look carefully, the difference is $278. The difference between this value and this value is $278. We can either add some short-term borrowing here. It will balance. We can either issue some long-term debt here. It will balance. We can either issue some new stocks. We can either sell some new stocks. It will balance. Or what Isaac said, we can reduce dividend payments by this much. That will balance. So this example is telling us we have more assets than liabilities. It means we will need external financing, right? We can go for short-term borrowing, we can go for long-term borrowing, we can go for issuing common stock, or we can reduce the dividend payments. That will help us to balance. Questions? How to do pro forma income statement, how to do pro forma balance sheet, and how to balance. Questions? All good? Now let's take another assumption. So let's say last year we have this much of sales, right? $5,000. And we are saying that last year we generated $5,000 amount of sales by only utilizing 80% of the capacity. If we add this new term, we made $5,000 of sales by only utilizing 80% of capacity. What is the implication of this statement? We're only utilizing by 80% of capacity. We are not utilizing all of our assets, right? We have some space so that we can generate more sales, right, with our existing assets. So that means if we divide 5,000 by 80%, we will get 6,500. This is the sales we can generate without investing in assets. Make sense? So if this is true, what is our pro forma sales? Do you think for the next year, if we are generating $5,500 of sales, did we reach our max capacity or not? We did not reach our max capacity, right? This year we are generating 5,000, which is 80% of our capacity. That means our total capacity is 6,250, and we have not reached what? Our max capacity, right? So do you think we need investment in fixed asset next year? In the pro forma. So do you think this additional $500 of investment is required or not? Required or not required? Yes, no. Required, not required. Not required. In that case, if we just say this is 5,000, that should be an asset. Just change it. So because we are not reaching our max capacity, even if we are generating 5,500 amount of sales, right? So that's why on the pro forma, in a realistic way, we don't need to put any money on the fixed asset, right? We can still operate the operations with the existing asset. If we don't increase this fixed asset value, then our asset is 12,150. If we compare, what is the problem? 12,150 is our total asset, 12,372 is our total liabilities and owner's equity. What is the problem? Unbalanced. And what is the reason for unbalanced?
You didn't follow through with the projection. Sort of decided you wouldn't do it.
Right. And what we have more, asset or liabilities?
You have more liabilities, so you need to reduce some of your debt, increase your dividends, or decrease your stock.
Absolutely. So those around $100 to $200, we can do what? Reduce most payment, reduce long-term debt, or we can give more dividends. Makes sense. Quick recap. What we did? Initially, we projected the sales. Then for the income statement, we assume all else are fixed percentage of sales. Projected net income, projected dividends, projected everything given up, right? On the balance sheet, projected everything based on sales, and then we decide plug variables, debt and equities, increase or decrease, so that we can balance it, right? So that's the way you should decide. Some of you going forward, if you are joining some corporations for project valuation, this is the thing you will be doing. Start with sales, project everything in income statements. On the balance sheet, you have to balance. Couple of things you have to make sure in real life, in real practice in the industry, everything doesn't move with sales. If you decide what should be your next year long-term debt, if you know the interest rate percentage, that should be interest payment for next year, which is not dependent on sales. Right? If you decide how much fixed asset you have, you know the depreciation rate, that should be a depreciation for next year, which doesn't vary with sales, right? If you know what is your payout ratio, what is your retention ratio, that should be your next year payout and retention from net income. That will affect on the equity side. Make sense? So this is a complete process how to project your financial statements. Questions? Good so far? Okay, so now we are moving on to this one. So let's do these sample questions and let me know the answer. Done. Who wants to volunteer? Yes. Yeah, we can do what? Performance income. What is the next year sales? I have. Is this year it is new next year sales? Right? 350, okay, fine. How much is your profit margin? So 6% of this one, right? How much you got? 321. You all good so far? Okay. So far today we learned pro forma, right? In pro forma, we are trying to talk about our sales will grow by 10, 15, 20% next year. So if our sales grow up next year, how can we finance those additional growth, right? So for corporations, if the growth is really, really small or low, we can support this growth from our retained earnings, right? Which is called internally generated cash or internally generated financing, right? However, if the growth is really, really high, but we are not able to support additional financing from retained earnings, what can we do? We'll go for outside to issue more debt, more equity, right? So going forward, we'll learn two different types of growth that we can support either from the internal financing or going outside with external financing. Internal growth rate. So when we talk about internal growth rate, that means using our own cash, which is coming from retained earnings, how much growth we can support for these corporations. Other words, without going to outside to ask for more money, how much growth we can support for these corporations. That is called internal growth rate. If you read the definition, how much the firm can grow using retained earnings, as this is the only source of financing. We will not go outside to get more money. One of the assumptions, dividend payout ratio is constant. In history, if we pay 30%, 40%, or 50% dividend, from our net income, we will keep doing so going forward. We will keep paying the historical dividend payout ratio going forward. If we do that, this is the formula that actually tells us, using the retained earnings from the corporations, how much growth we can support for this fund. That is called internal growth rate. Look at the formula. On the numerator, we have return on asset. Return on asset is basically net income over total asset. B, that means retention ratio. We already learned that retention ratio or plowback ratio is retained earnings from income statement divided by net income. Don't get confused. There are two retained earnings, one in the balance sheet, which is accumulated from the history. This is not the same thing. This is coming from income statement, which is the addition only from this year. Make sense? Only from this year. You can also calculate this retention ratio 1 minus dividend payout ratio. If we know this value, just plug in, we'll get the result. Make sense? So let's do this problem, then we'll go to the sustainable growth rate. Done. Not yet. Who wants to volunteer? Yes. No. 1050. Okay. What is next year's sales? Okay. What is net profit? 3% of 50,000, right? How much you got? Okay. 1,500. And then payout ratio is 30%. So that should be 450. And then addition to retained earnings is basically if you deduct 450 from there, or you can say 70%, sorry, 30% is payout, 70% is retained earnings, right? Retention ratio. You can do both ways. You can either do 1,500 times 70%, or you can do 1,500 minus 450, and both will lead to 1,050. Make sense? Yes.
So the numbers make sense. It's a bunch of math.
Mhm.
How do we know that that's, they get that that's next year's expected retained earnings, but how do we know that it increased by that?
That's a projection. So are you confused about the projected one or increased one?
The increase.
So thing is that I think let's kind of read it. What is the interpretation of this written earnings from balance sheet? This is done this year or this is done over the years in balance sheet? What is the interpretation of this one from balance sheet? What is the interpretation of same thing from income statement? Are these values and that value same or different? What is the interpretation? Right. Even though if you look SEC Edgar, different party statements, they call both written earnings, but this is the accumulated written earnings from 5, 10, 20 years when we started the business. Till now. But if you go to income statement, this value, this is the addition or increase for this year only. This is the more from this year only. So when you are saying what is the addition of retained earnings this year or next year, we are referring to income. When we are saying what is the accumulated value, we refer to balance sheet. In the retention ratio formula, this is the income statement item. It's the addition or increase of this year. This is not the balance sheet item, okay? Don't get confused. Make sense?
Yes.
We are good with this problem? Okay. Now, sustainable growth rate. When you say sustainable growth rate, it says that internally generated cash flows and also issuing debt to maintain a constant debt ratio. So when we say addition to retained earnings, which is going to the balance sheet, it will increase our equity value, right? If we don't adjust the debt, that means next year our debt ratio will change, right? So that's why if we adjust the debt similar way, we are making sure our debt ratio is not changed, right? So sustainable growth rate is trying to tell us if we keep some money from our net income, which increase our equity value, and on the balance sheet, if we issue some more debt so that our debt ratio is constant over the year, by these both sources of money, retained earnings and issuing some debt, both sources of money, how much growth we can accommodate, how much growth we can generate, which is known as sustainable growth. Major difference, internal and sustainable. Internal growth rate, we are only using retained earnings or internally generated cash flow. Sustainable growth rate, we are using the internal money, we are also using money issuing the debt. By doing so, how much growth we can support for the population. Assumption, dividend payout ratio is same, constant. What we did last year, we're going to do the same thing this year. We will not use any equity. Due to the new retained earnings, if the equity value change, we will proportionally use some debt so that our debt ratio stays the same, but we will not use or issue an equity. By doing so, how much growth we can support for the population. This is the formula to calculate sustainable growth rate. Return on equity, which is basically net income divided by total asset. Retention ratio, right? B is our retention ratio. All of the same. Yes, my
The ROA was, I think, moving towards.
you're right. I said equity, but I write asset. Thank you. The only difference between internal and sustainable is ROE versus ROA. All else the same. If profitability ratio times the retention divided by 1 minus profitability times the retention. So this is the sustainable growth rate formula. This is the internal growth rate formula. Structurally same, only difference is this one. Question. So you have the formula, right? Internal and sustainable. Then move on to these two problems. Okay. Done. So anyone from the last school want to volunteer? No. Anyone from the third? Problem one, let's do problem one. So who wants to volunteer? We just need to plug in the values, right? We did not finish problem one. From third row. From fourth row. From second row, did you finish problem one? Anyone wants to volunteer? Okay,
I got about 20%.
20%. So how did you got that? So the internal growth rate formula, internal growth rate. What is the formula?
Your ROA times your retention ratio divided by 1 minus that.
This is the formula? Okay. What is the ROA from here? Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Or you can also do what is our debt ratio? So debt to equity ratio is 0.7, right? Right. Equity is 8.7, right? So 70% of this should be debt. And if you sum these two, that should be total asset, right? So your total asset should be 8,500 times 0.7 plus 8,500. How much is the total asset?
14,450.
14,450.
450.
Make sense? So your ROA should be 3,000 over 14,450. Around 20. How much is exactly 0.2076? So now plug in here 0.2076 times payout is 20. That means retention is 80, right? 1 minus 0.2076 times 0.8. Now don't get confused. If you add a parenthesis here, it helps for the calculation. Okay? Because in mathematical operator, multiplication comes before addition and subtraction, right? If you add a parenthesis, that helps the calculation. So 0.2076 is your ROA, 0.8 is your retention. Plug in the values. How much you got, Matt?
It was 0.1996.
Okay, around 19.
Yeah.
0.96 or 9%, something like that, right? Maybe 19.96, 92, 93, doesn't matter. All good. You have to find out the asset or ROA any way you want. There are so many different ways. Which one looks easy for you? Just follow that, okay? Find ROA. Retention is given, plug in. Now let's do Second one. Sustainable growth rate. So who is next to help me? Yes, Isaac. DuPont identity. Do you need that? Then what else you can do it? How can you get the ROE? So the formula is ROE times B. Right. So how to get the ROE? We need the DuPont. So ROE, if you remember from the last chapter, DuPont analysis, right? Three factors. Profit margin, then total asset turnover, then equity multiplier, right? There's the DuPont, right? From this problem, profit margin 5%, total asset turnover 1.3, 1.7. So how much is your ROE? $1,105. Okay, so 1,105 times 65 is payout, and 35 is retention, right? 1 minus 1,105. So this parenthesis is not required, but if you do it, it may help you for the calculation, okay? Otherwise, you may got confused. And how much you got for the sustainable growth rate? 4%. Questions. Internal sustainable. Can we do it on the test if we have the formula? Yes, Ajay.
So when you say that you'll give us the formula about the test, so will the midterm looks like, you know, have a huge formula sheet, and then we just get to use all those to solve all the problems? Okay.
So it should be like a page or two, depending on how much you cover, okay? So basically, on the very last page, okay, you will get one extra white sheet for any scratch you want to do, okay? The next one, there is something formula sheet, maybe 1 or 2 page. You can use it, okay? Because for scratch, you cannot do it on the main part of the test. You cannot bring any paper for scratch. So if you need any scratch, I'll give it on the very end. I'll give you the formula on the very end. You can take it out, look at it, do whatever you want to do. Make sense?
We have multiple choice for this.
Multiple choice. All will be MCQs. So I think this is already we covered because these 3 factors is coming from DuPont, right? And also your dividend policy. If you are able to retain more, that means tomorrow you will be able to buy more assets from that, right? If you are not able to retain more because you are paying a lot of dividends, tomorrow you will not have a lot of cash for your asset growth, right? So when you think about the growth of any corporation, what are the factors? Profit margin. If we can generate more profit from a given number of sales, that is my efficiency. That gives me more money to retain. Total asset turnover. Efficiency. The more efficient you are, the more money you can generate. Financial leverage. When you have more leverage, more debt in your corporations, that means what? You have more money than the equity on, right? Which you can use to buy assets. And also dividend policy. These are the factors that actually impact or influence your growth. Make sense? Now, this is all for today, but from the next class, try to have this one. So we will start using this one hopefully from next month, okay? And if you keep laptop, that's better because sometimes we learn the same problem, how we can do it. Okay? From next class, we moving on more on time value of money, lot of math problems on it. Okay? So Thursday, right? We'll see you on Thursday. Okay.